Shalom, mishpacha. Hello, family, and welcome to A Small Sanctuary. We are continuing our series on the sacred table, and in this episode, I am going to talk about keeping kosher. We are going to divide this episode into 3 parts. Part 1, I will briefly explain what the dietary laws are in Judaism. Part 2, I will share some of my personal story, which in turn will lead into Part 3, where I give some actionable tips and perspectives if you are on your own kosher keeping journey. And of course, this is the reminder that I will be going vegan for the month of Shevat. #Vegan Shevat, the Jewish answer to Veganuary, in a week from now. Hopefully I will be able to upload this fast, so you will be able to follow along for the ride. And I have my meal planner at the ready for some meal planning, and of course my vegan books, and of course there is a plethora of online resources out there as well. As always, for this entire series on the sacred table, or any video content or written content I produce that talks about sacred eating, here's my disclaimer. I am not a dietitian, nutritionist, medical professional, or mental health professional. Please only take this as me sharing my experiences. It does not constitute advice in any way. And if you wish to implement your own altered dietary practices, please consult with your doctor or mental health care provider before you do so. And always keep your own safety, well-being, and joy at the center of any ritual choices or ethical choices that you may make. Section 1, the Jewish dietary laws. What are they? Now, of course, there's a lot of information out there, and I'm not going to go into all that much detail, but I will link to resources talking more about the Jewish dietary laws. The Jewish dietary laws are a form of sanctified restrictive eating that are meant to affirm our relationship with the divine, with the Torah, with the Jewish community, and with our own bodies, the natural environment, and the animal and vegetable world out there. They are meant to be holistic, which is not to say that they are meant to be rigid or that there is a one-size-fits-all approach. The dietary laws are not a binary. They are a continuum, already recognized as such in ancient biblical and rabbinic Jewish sources, but certainly so today. So follow your own guidance, your own rabbinic guidance, your own denominational guidance, your own inner sense of well-being when you make these choices, and know that there are many ways to keep kosher. A Small Sanctuary is a pluralist Jewish space, and I want to be able to hold many ways of keeping the mitzvot, including the mitzvah of kashrut. So the dietary laws break down into 2 main sources from the biblical text. One are the laws in the book of Leviticus that actually tell us which species of animals we cannot eat. We can only eat livestock that chews the cud and has a split hoof. We can only eat sea creatures that have fins and scales. And we can only eat a designated and sometimes slightly expanded list of fowl, but the common element between these different fowl is that they tend to be not birds of prey. For the rest, we are also told not to boil a kid, i.e. a baby goat, in its mother's milk. And we are also told way back when, in the book of Genesis, very early on, as part of the Noahide commandment, not to consume blood. So that is what the Bible actually says about the dietary laws. And the rabbinic tradition expands on these greatly, including a range of practices around separating meat from dairy, certain forms of ritual slaughter, certain forms of kosher supervision, certain strategies around how to prepare kosher utensils, and how to prepare food in a kosher way. One theory is that Adam and Chava, the allegory of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, was meant to be basically a vegan paradise. They were supposed to eat with non-violence and in harmony with nature. As things progressed in the biblical narrative, I'm talking about the first to 11th chapters of the book of Genesis, we see that to Noah and his descendants, eating meat was given as a compromise to curtail the violent impulses in human beings. And that is really how I understand our propensity to eat meat. Yes, eating meat is halachically permitted under the scope of Jewish law. Yet the Torah really struggles and wrestles with this tension that in order to eat meat, we have to sublimate a violent impulse in ourselves to kill an animal for consumption. Even so, apart from the ban from eating blood, there are no restrictions in the Noahide covenant, in the covenant that applies to all human beings to this day. When the Torah is given on Mount Sinai, we are starting to see the development of the dietary laws as we know them in Judaism. And you kind of see a narrowing of the scope. What once was permitted now actually becomes restricted, especially with the kinds of meat we are allowed to eat. And this is, of course, where we get the whole notion from that Jews are not allowed to eat pork and shellfish and any number of other things. If you would draw the line from creation to revelation and our ultimate redemption, in which we hope to revert back to the Edenic ideal, as Isaiah so famously says, the lion shall lie down with the lamb, what you see is actually a motion. I don't really know how else to do it with my hands, where we are vegans at the beginning of creation, then we are allowed to eat everything. Then the Torah is brought in to refine and sanctify us through restricted sacred eating. And then at the end of days, when we experience the Messianic era, the era of redemption, we will once again become vegans or near vegans. And that is the arc from creation to revelation to redemption in our tradition. And keeping that in mind, the dietary laws start to make a lot of sense. In one way, they are an echo of the past, and in another way, they are a foreshadowing of our future, where we get to practice redemptive living to whatever standard we can manage and we are comfortable with in our spiritual journeys. So there are people who keep kosher who eat a lot of meat, but they eat strictly kosher meat. There are people who keep a form of kosher called eco-kosher, where they may limit their meat intake and actually eat meat that is grass-fed or pasture-raised or ethical, that might not be supervised in ritual slaughter in the same way. For instance, you have people who eat biblical kashrut, meaning they do not observe the rabbinic laws, but they do observe the rabbinic laws. You have pescatarians, lacto-ovo-vegetarians, and of course vegans. And this constellation of sacred practices, of our setting of the table, if you will, all can fall under the rubric of keeping kosher. Of course, the question that is often asked is, what is the deal with separating meat from milk? Why is that so important? And if you use the frame that I just described, it actually makes a lot of sense. This is all about respecting the staff of life, i.e. the milk that a mammal gives her young, by not combining it with the result or the outcome of death, i.e. the slaughtered animal before you. Somehow, Judaism seems to suggest that this is grotesque. Now, I would like to move on to the second section, which is my personal journey into keeping kosher. I did not grow up in a kosher home. Very far from it. I ate every kind of imaginable treif under the sun, and I grew up in a food-oriented, what we would call nowadays, foodie culture. We had a healthy and celebratory attitude to food. When I was a teenager, I became morally aware of the conundrum of eating meat. And I actually had a stint of being a vegetarian for about 3 months. But in the 1990s, where I was, it was really hard to find vegetarian alternatives. There was hardly any tofu, there were no meat replacements, and I wasn't really in the community of people who were vegetarian. I lived in a very carnivore-centric community, and so this phase didn't last long. But it did sensitize me, and it did teach me something very crucial about the discipline of ethical eating. Fast forward a number of years later, I started engaging with Judaism as a spiritual practice, and I started keeping kosher. Now, I did it fairly quickly, which is not something I particularly recommend, and changed my dietary habits in about the course of a year. There were definitely moments of tension and yearning as I relinquished some of my favorite foods like deli ham sandwiches and Thai sweet and sour coconut shrimp soup. But I got there and I transitioned into mainly a lacto-ovo vegetarian diet. There have been moments in my life where I've consumed more meat within the kosher laws or less meat within the kosher laws, but the practice that I've really had for the last 2 decades is to only eat meat for special occasions, Shevat, festivals, or as a special treat. Ironically, because of the content I make around the Jewish holidays on a small sanctuary, you will see me cooking a lot of meat, but in reality that tends to be more the exception than the norm. On a normal weekday, my family and I are lacto-ovo vegetarians with sometimes some fish, maybe once a week, and then on Shabbat we tend to eat chicken. We eat red meat maybe about 4 times a year, for Rosh Hashanah, for Pesach, for the major Jewish holidays. There are no kosher facilities in our area here, and so Trader Joe's is where we get our kosher chicken from, and sometimes our brisket for special occasions and holidays. But apart from that, that's all we have. There are no kosher eateries, no kosher stores, and no kosher restaurants. In the home, I keep a fully kosher home with some lenience implemented around non-hechshered cheese and non-hechshered milk and non-hechshered wine. But apart from that, it is meat that has been sourced from kosher sources and that has been ritually slaughtered as per halakha, and a complete separation of meat and dairy, separate utensils and separate dishes, which you will have seen on my previous videos. Out of the house, both at restaurants and at other people's homes, I tend to eat what we call hot dairy out. That sounds a bit strange, but all it really means is that I'm quite happy to have kosher food by ingredient, cooked in non-kosher utensils, as long as it is vegetarian or pescatarian. So if I go to a restaurant, I'll have a Beyond Burger or an Impossible Burger or a pizza or a piece of salmon. And even though it is not ideal that this has been cooked in utensils that aren't kosher, it is a compromise I am willing to make because I share the value of eating in community and building strong relationships with Jews and non-Jews where I live. There have been times in my life where I have been stricter. When I was living in large urban areas like New York or in LA, I would eat at kosher restaurants exclusively. All in all, I'm very happy with the rhythm that I have. Which kind of brings me to talking a little bit about why I'm engaging in this vegan challenge for the month of Shevat. I want to push myself a little bit. I want to evaluate for myself whether the current system that has been very stable in my life needs tweaking, practically, dietarily, spiritually, ethically. I kind of consider it a reset to do this month of veganism so that I can create some reflective space and an impetus to be creative and then reflect on where I want to go with my dietary choices. Could I incorporate more conscious veganism in my life? Do I want to scale back my meat consumption a little more? Are there ways in which I can replace dairy products that I tend to use quite thoughtlessly, given the impact of dairy on animal welfare and the environment? Those are kind of some of the questions that I want to explore. In the last section, before I start the third section, I want to briefly dwell on the 4 reasons why I keep kosher and in the way that I do. I would term these as follows. 1, distinctiveness. 2, holiness. 3, mindfulness. And 4, ethical considerations. Number 1, distinctiveness. Keeping kosher strongly affirms me in my Jewish identity. It reminds me of my Jewishness through every morsel that I put in my mouth, and it connects me to Jews across space and time throughout Jewish history and extending into the Jewish future. And I think that the cultural cohesion that can come with keeping kosher or keeping some degree of kosher can be incredibly affirming for your Jewish identity. Number 2, holiness. I am, at the end of the day, a religious Jew, and I believe that this is what God commands of me. And I trust the Torah's innate wisdom that this will lead me to a process of sanctification, justice, and self-improvement. And it is a way for me to have a conversation with the Holy One of Blessing through the mundane choices that I lift up. Number 3, mindfulness. Keeping kosher draws my mind to a moment of intentionality. It makes me slow down. It makes me appreciate what I eat. Blessing my food before and after makes me mindful of what I eat. And these are all spiritual practices, but kind of colors in the lines of that relationship by saying food is important. It's worth paying attention to. Number 4, ethical considerations. I think that speaks for itself. I have used kashrut over the years to reduce my intake of meat and animal products. I like the idea of being an imperfect but moderate and modest eater of meat, and that I can develop these other avenues in order to make ethical choices, including how I source the meat, what kind of meat I eat, how often I eat it, etc. For me, there is no opposition between the ritual commandments and the ethical commandments. The ritual commandments can be seen as the vessels in which we pour the sacred intention of our ethical considerations. Part number 3, some tips and tricks on how to enhance your own journey with sacred eating in a Jewish context. Again, this does not constitute advice. I am not a nutritionist or a medical professional, and I'm not qualified to give you advice. But I can talk a little bit about certain strategies that Jews throughout the ages have used in order to enhance their practice. I get a lot of questions about how you start on a kosher keeping journey. So after you've consulted with the medical professionals in your life and you have evaluated whether this is right and healthy for you, then there are some frameworks to help you think through some of your choices. Keeping kosher in any form to any degree is in and of itself a destabilizing agent. It's meant to rock the boat a little bit. It is meant to prod us to reflect on the bodily function that we take for granted too often. But also be aware that it will be destabilizing for the people around you in your environment, your loved ones, your family, your friends. Depending on your living situation, your work situation, your budget situation, these are all things to kind of mindfully prepare in your mind and think, what can I handle? What is attainable for me? And what is my goal? If you live with other people, giving them kavod, giving them respect and honor as you are in relationship with these other people is really, really crucial. While sometimes tensions can arise over boundaries regarding the dietary laws, no one wants to fight or break relationships over Torah. That would be a terrible, terrible shame. So analyze for yourself who you are in relationship with and how they are likely to react. And then I'm going to give you a 3-point frame to help you think through some of these choices. Think of relationships. Think of situation. And think of power. So people, place, and power. People, place, and power. That works nicely. People. Who are the people you can negotiate your practice with, and how are they likely to react? Are they kind of friendly folk who are just happy to accommodate? Great. You might push yourself in that instance a little bit. Are they people who feel a little bit threatened by your practice? those might not be the people that you want to choose to push the boundaries with at that time. This also applies to context in terms of when you push these boundaries or when you negotiate these boundaries. But this is a frame that I give to students of Judaism. You know, if you go home for your Easter ham or your Christmas dinner or your Thanksgiving turkey at these key emotionally charged moments with your family, that might not be the moment for you to push your boundaries. You have to survey how emotionally charged the situation is before you open with your kosher keeping gambit. Choose a normal dinner. Say, Mom, Dad, I'm gonna come over on a normal Tuesday night. Would you mind making me something vegetarian? Anticipate. Mom, Dad, I am going to eat the Christmas ham this year, but I just want to put on your mind that in the future, I may choose to make a different choice. Or, Mom, Dad, I knew we didn't grow up in a kosher keeping home, and this is not a kosher Thanksgiving turkey, and I would like to keep kosher as part of the Jewish values you raised me with, but this may not be the moment that I negotiate the kashrut of that particular turkey, but maybe next year. The second one is place. Where are you? Obviously, in your own home, barring flatmates or shared kitchens, you will have more autonomy to implement your own growth path into sacred eating. When you are at work or in a restaurant, you will have less autonomy to set your own pace. Even thinking of it like that can help you clarify where you want to stake out more autonomy for your sacred choices and where you are willing to relinquish autonomy for your sacred choices. Maybe you want to keep kosher in your own home, and maybe you're not ready to negotiate that with work colleagues. Maybe you're not comfortable disclosing your spiritual journey with your workmates. So place is very contextual as well. And then lastly, power. Who has power over you? Or maybe you have more influence over someone else. Often when we are in the parental relationship or a professional relationship, it's harder to assert our practice, especially when the practice is new. That's also okay. It's also okay to say, at this moment, I don't really have the kind of autonomy and power in this relationship that I want in order to navigate this new practice in my life. And I'm going to hold off on introducing it into this relationship. The goal with this kind of 3D chess is that you can help yourself ease yourself into a rhythm that feels healthy and supportive without rushing yourself. Always go back and check with yourself what feels comfortable to me, what feels healthy to me, what is the difference between the discomforts of growth and the discomforts of trauma. We want people to grow spiritually. We do not want them to acquire religious trauma. That needs to be a very clear distinction when we guide people on their spiritual journeys. Granting each other the grace and the autonomy to engage with the sacred table, to engage with sacred eating on our terms that brings us fulfillment and meaning and an ethical orientation worth pursuing is ultimately the goal. So I hope you found this useful. Next video will be all about vegan Shevat. I'm going to take you along on some of my meal planning journey, and I can't wait to get stuck in with this beautiful book. I mean, there are some amazing recipes in here. Look at that. Bigger is better vegetable lasagna. Well, if I can get that vegan cheese to melt and crisp up like that, I will tell you I'll be a very happy woman. Follow me along for that. Let's keep the conversation going about the ethical and spiritual implications of sacred eating in the Jewish tradition, in the vegan community, in the vegetarian community, and in the kosher keeping community. I really look forward to seeing some of your comments below. Follow me along, make good and healthy choices, love food, love life, choose life, be well, friends. With peace and blessings from my bite to your bite. Take care, everyone. Shalom uvracha.